6 bizarre and unusual deaths. Number 6. Akbar Salabiro. I'm sure we've all seen those cartoons where a character will be swallowed whole by an animal or a monster. In the case of Akbar Salabiro, this was a reality. 25-year-old Akbar Salabiro went missing on the 25th of March 2017 when he left his home on the remote island of Sulawesi, Indonesia. He left for the harvest and subsequently was never seen alive again. There were reports the night he went missing of cries that came from a palm oil plantation very close to where the man lived. After family members became concerned, a search party was sent out the following morning to look for Akbar Salabiro, and the family also called the police. It was only later that day that a large, reticulated python snake was discovered slithering about near his back garden, and according to residents, had a belly so large it was struggling to move. They suspected that Salabiro may have been inside the snake because they recognized the boots that outlined in the snake's stomach. The residents then cut into the belly of the snake, where they discovered the body of Akbar Salabiro, who was eaten alive and had his whole body consumed by the large python. Along with the story, there's actually video of the residents cutting into the snake and finding the corpse. According to the man's wife, she didn't even discover the truth of his death until finding images and videos in news reports online. Funnily enough, this was not the only case of someone being consumed by a local snake in Sulawesi, Indonesia, when just over a year later, 54-year-old Watiba was eaten by the same breed of snake when the deadly reptile trespassed into her garden. Number 5. ELISA Lam. On January 31st, 2013, a Canadian student of the University of British Columbia went missing after visiting the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, California. Her death was under suspicious circumstances, and the events leading up to her death raised more questions than they could provide answers. Strange security footage from an elevator at the hotel, presumably one that was malfunctioning, recorded ELISA Lam hiding and nervously looking down the hotel hallways, peering out from the elevator as if she was being followed or paranoid about someone. She would go from mashing on the control panel to stepping outside the elevator briefly. The video footage also showed her making frankly bizarre hand and arm movements before then getting back into the elevator to hide. After ELISA Lam was reported missing and the search for her body was underway, guests at the Cecil Hotel reported issues they were having with the water in the hotel, claiming the pressure was too low before making further complaints about the odd taste and the black color of the water. On February 21st, ELISA Lam's body was discovered in one of the water tanks located on the roof. This water tank was used to serve the kitchen, the coffee shop, and the rooms the guests were staying in. Her body was found decomposing and bloated. Upon analysis, there was no physical trauma to the body, ruling out sexual assault or violent conduct. The only substances discovered in her body also were prescription medication and small traces of painkillers, such as ibuprofen. Mystery revolved around how she ended up getting onto the roof, climbing up onto the tanks, opening them, closing them, and then drowning. The idea that she got into the tank herself seemed highly unlikely. Theories suggest that she may have been followed by someone who wanted to kill her, explaining the odd elevator footage, although, as said before, no evidence was found pointing towards any foul play. The police ruled the death as an accidental drowning. ELISA Lam did suffer from mental health issues, such as bipolar disorder, and it was very likely that she was experiencing a psychotic episode. A video by that chapter explained this case well and put forward some evidence that reaching the water tanks wouldn't have been as difficult as originally theorized. Number 4. CHOPPY the Poodle, Marta Espina, Edith Sola, and an unidentified man. In Buenos Aires, Argentina, 1988, a bizarre series of deaths occurred after a poodle named CHOPPY fell from a 13th-floor balcony. It's unsure what caused the dog to drop, but when he did, he hit and killed 75-year-old Marta Espina, hitting the woman on the head, with both the dog and the woman dying instantly. As a crowd gathered to watch the scene, while standing on the edge of the crowd, 48-year-old Edith Sola was then killed after being hit by an oncoming bus, dying in the middle of the street. After this, the deaths weren't over. A third person, an unidentified man, suffered a heart attack after witnessing all of this, and subsequently died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. This seemed to be an unfortunate chain reaction, with a perfect storm of events leading from one death to another. A neighbor of the dog's owner told the local newspaper, "We are all extremely sad and cannot understand how this could happen. Just imagine how the Montoyas, the dog's owners, feel about it. Just imagine the pain of not just losing your beloved pet, but the dog's death being the main contributing factor to a further 3. While strange, it's also quite sad." Number 3. A Congolese soccer team struck by lightning. We've all heard those stories about people being struck by lightning, and it's said that it's one of the most unlikely things that could ever happen to a person. In 1997, however, a single strike of lightning was enough to kill 11 people simultaneously. A soccer match was tying at 1-1 in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the Kasai province, when during the match, a bolt of lightning struck the pitch. All 11 athletes from the visiting team were electrocuted and killed by the bolt of lightning. Curiously though, none of the players of the home team, Basanga, were affected by the blast. Accusations of black magic and witchcraft were leveled against the home side and heavily speculated amongst the local community. This was, of course, due to the victims being entirely of the visiting team. It was not uncommon at the time for soccer clubs in this part of Africa to use witch doctors to place a hex on the opposing team. The country was caught up in a civil war at the time, and the details are limited to this event, so it's important to recognize we only have a small portion of information reported. There was a similar accident though, albeit far less severe, where 6 soccer players were struck by lightning during a thunderstorm in South Africa. Thankfully though, there were no reported fatalities. Number 2. Frank Hayes. For some people, winning against all the odds is something to die for, and in the case of Frank Hayes, this is exactly what happened. Born 1888, 35-year-old Frank Hayes was a New York stableman and a horse trainer who had never actually participated in a race before. Regardless, Hayes was scheduled to participate in a steeplechase, a horse race that involved jumping over obstacles such as fences. The horse that Hayes rode was named Sweet Kiss, and the bookmakers had his odds set at winning the race at 20-1. The race took place on June 4th, 1923, and during this, Frank Hayes suffered a heart attack while riding, dying presumably at some point in the middle of the race. Bizarrely though, his body stayed on the saddle, and his horse managed to make it all the way to the finish line, finishing in first place and winning the race by a head. When Miss A.M. Frayling, the owner of the horse, rushed over to congratulate him, she discovered his lifeless body, which none of them had noticed during the steeplechase. It was speculated that a possible cause for the heart attack was Hayes' attempt at rapid weight loss, bringing him down from 142 pounds to 130. Once he was leading, the adrenaline and ill health could have triggered the heart attack. The horse never ran a track again and was appropriately nicknamed Sweet Kiss of Death. Number 1. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was a powerful individual with connections to some of the most powerful people on the planet, including names like Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and disgraced British royalty like Prince Andrew. Nobody knows exactly where his wealth originated from, but some speculate it came from billionaire Leslie Wexler, who he had an association with, or it could have come from mogul Robert Maxwell, who was the father of Epstein's long-term associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. He allegedly made trips on his plane called the Lolita Express to his private island to exploit young women and children who were hired by his associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, with many powerful people also allegedly making these trips, such as Bill Clinton, famously making 20+ recorded flights on this plane. Epstein was put on trial for the exploitation, trafficking, and sexual assault of children over a prolonged period. This was brought on by the accusations from Virginia Roberts Giuffre that Jeffrey Epstein had sexually assaulted her when she was underage. During his trial, he was housed in a jail, awaiting his judgment. Jeffrey Epstein was housed in the high-security Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. The jail was nicknamed as the Guantanamo of New York and housed prisoners in the past, like Mexican drug kingpin El Chapo. And due to El Chapo's famous prison escapes, you can probably capture an idea of the security level of this prison. Epstein was found in his cell dead on August 10th, 2019. His apparent cause of death was an attempted hanging, and he was found on his floor in cardiac arrest before dying in his cell. He had apparently wrapped one end of a bedsheet around his neck, tied a knot, and wraps the other end of the bedsheet onto his bunk bed, where he then leaned forward in some alternative method of trying to hang himself. The guards attempted CPR when they found him, but he died, and his death was quickly ruled as suicide. The reason this death was strange was the suspicious circumstances around his death. He was placed in a special housing unit and had his cellmate moved from his cell. This was done after he was placed on suicide watch on July 23rd after an apparent suicide attempt. Epstein claimed he was actually assaulted by his cellmate, who was an ex-cop who had murdered multiple people in a suspected drug deal gone wrong. Despite this, Epstein was taken off suicide watch shortly after, and his cellmate was removed. He was supposed to be given a new cellmate, which conveniently never happened. The guards were supposed to check his cell every 30 minutes and regularly check on his condition. The guards, however, instead of actually doing their job, fell asleep for approximately 3 hours in the night and even failed to check on his cell when they were awake conducting their daily count. Along with this, the security cameras were also conveniently malfunctioning around the time of his apparent suicide. On the same day, Epstein was said to be upbeat about his situation by his lawyers, adding further doubt to the suicide claims. In autopsy reports, it was also concluded that Epstein's broken neck bones were more consistent with strangulation than self-inflicted hanging. This was the first suicide at the correctional facility for 14 years. There was a strong motive for powerful people to get rid of Epstein because he potentially had dirt on a lot of them. There were allegations that Epstein would record these people when they made visits to his private island, sexually assaulting young girls and keeping the video footage as potential blackmail. He had also owned a black book that was filled to the brim of the names of celebrities, businessmen, politicians, and it's likely that out of all of them, nefarious activities could have been taking place with at least some of these people. And lastly, he'd also had connections to world-famous politicians like the Clinton family, who have also been accused in the past of murdering people who could potentially expose the Clinton family for whatever they were getting up to behind closed doors. This is referred to as the Clinton body count if you want to give it a Google, because the timeline of events is very interesting. His trial was a potential threat to these people, and if the theories are correct, Epstein could have been taken out to protect these people. Jeffrey Epstein was a terrible human being, and the world may be a better place without him. But one thing is for sure, he probably didn't kill himself.